What would you do if the very foundation of your identity was built on a lie? In the tumultuous 1930s America, where dreams often collided with harsh realities, Al Capone, a name synonymous with crime and power, was not just a notorious mobster, but a man navigating the labyrinth of his own vulnerabilities. Hidden beneath the surface of his hardened exterior was a boy yearning for connection, a desire to be seen beyond the shadows of his criminal empire. Al, known to his closest friends as Scarface, was a man forged in the fires of poverty and rejection. Growing up in a rough neighborhood of Brooklyn, he was no stranger to hardship. His dreams, although grand, were often overshadowed by the weight of his past. He aspired to be more than just a cog in the wheel of organized crime. He wanted to build a legacy, to create a world where loyalty and family mattered above all else. Yet there was a gnawing vulnerability that haunted him, a fear of abandonment, rooted in the loss of his family's simple joys to the cruel realities of life. As the Great Depression swept through the nation, Al's world grew increasingly hostile. The streets were filled with desperation, and the air crackled with the tension of survival. Crime surged as people clung to any means necessary to stay afloat. In this unforgiving landscape, Al's empire thrived, yet the very foundation of his success was built upon the suffering of others. Each deal made and each enemy silenced came at a cost, not just to those around him, but to his own soul. He was a man caught in a web of his own making, struggling to reconcile his dreams with the darkness that surrounded him. One fateful day, while rifling through a collection of long-forgotten family documents, Al stumbled upon an old letter that would forever alter the course of his life. It spoke of a sister he never knew, a ghost from his past that had been hidden away by the very family he had fought to protect. The revelation hit him like a freight train, shattering his carefully constructed facade. This sister, whose existence had been buried beneath layers of secrecy, represented a part of him he had lost, a connection he never knew he craved. The emotions surged within him: anger, sorrow, and a longing for redemption. This newfound knowledge ignited a fierce internal conflict. Here was a man who had spent years building a life of power and fear, now faced with the possibility of vulnerability and connection. His heart, often shielded by bravado, ached with the desire to reach out, to understand, and perhaps to mend the fractures of his past. Yet the very world he inhabited, the criminal underbelly of Chicago, demanded loyalty to a different code, one that often disregarded the ties of blood and the bonds of kinship. As Al grappled with the weight of this discovery, he found himself at a crossroads. The stakes were higher than ever. His empire was under threat from rival gangs, and the law was closing in. The revelation of his sister's existence was not just an emotional upheaval, it was a potential weapon that could be used against him. How could he protect her from the dangers of his world? How could he reconcile the life he led with the family he never knew? In the midst of this turmoil, a chance encounter with a woman named Clara would further complicate his journey. Clara, a fiercely independent woman fighting for the rights of the marginalized, stood in stark contrast to Al's world. Her spirit ignited something within him, a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could forge a new path. Their unlikely friendship blossomed amid the chaos, each illuminating the other's vulnerabilities and dreams. Clara's passion for social justice and her unwavering belief in the power of change inspired Al to confront the very demons he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Yet, the road ahead was fraught with danger. As Al's past threatened to unearth itself, and as the shadows of betrayal loomed large, he was forced to question everything he believed. Was it too late for redemption? Could he break free from the chains of his former life and fight for a future that included his sister? The answers lay buried deep within the turmoil of his heart as he stood at the brink of transformation, ready to challenge the very essence of who he was. In a world where survival often meant sacrificing dreams for power, Al Capone was about to embark on a journey of self-discovery, fueled by the very love and connection he once thought lost forever. As the story unfolds, it would not only test his resolve but challenge the fabric of his identity and the legacy he wished to leave behind. As Al Capone grappled with the revelation of his sister's existence, he felt the ground beneath him begin to shift. The weight of this newfound knowledge pressed heavily on his chest, stirring a tempest of emotions that threatened to spill over. With the city's violence escalating, rival gangs encroaching on his territories, and the law breathing down his neck, Al found himself caught in a precarious balance between his criminal empire and a desire for redemption. Each day became a battle, not just for survival, but for the soul of a man who had spent years constructing a facade of invincibility. The streets of Chicago, once a landscape he dominated, now felt foreign and hostile. Al's heart raced as he navigated the alleys, where loyalty shifted like shadows, and every face could belong to an enemy. As he attended to business, he felt the gnawing fear that his sister could become a pawn in a game he never wished to play. The thought of her suffering because of his choices ignited a fierce protectiveness within him, but he also knew that revealing her existence could invite disaster. In the midst of this turmoil, Clara entered his life like a gust of fresh air. Their friendship blossomed in the unlikeliest of places, a speakeasy hidden in the depths of the city, where the rich and poor mingled in defiance of the prohibition laws. Clara had a fire in her eyes, a passion for equality that inspired Al, pulling him closer to a world he had long ignored. She was fighting for those who had been silenced, for the very people his empire often exploited. Yet even as they shared moments of laughter and camaraderie, a veil of tension hung between them, rooted in the stark differences of their worlds. Clara's work often brought her into contact with those who had been victimized by Al's operations, and she was unafraid to voice her discontent. Each interaction felt like a dagger aimed at Al's heart, forcing him to confront truths he had long buried. "You can't just look the other way," she challenged him one evening, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "You have the power to help, yet you choose to perpetuate the cycle of violence. Don't you see that you're part of the problem?" Her words struck a chord deep within him. Al felt the walls of his carefully constructed identity begin to crack. He had built his empire on loyalty and fear, yet here was a woman urging him to consider the lives entangled in his web of power. As he watched her stand up for the marginalized, her determination igniting a spark in his heart, he wrestled with his own conflicting desires. Did he want to be a man of power, or did he yearn to be a man of change? But the danger was palpable. One night, as Al made his way through the familiar streets, he was ambushed by rival gang members seeking to assert their dominance. The brutal confrontation served as a chilling reminder of the world he inhabited. He fought back with ferocity, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Yet as he took down one assailant, he was left with a haunting realization. Each punch he threw was not just an act of self-defense, but a testament to the violence that defined him. In the aftermath, as he caught his breath, the weight of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders. The blood on his hands was not just from enemies, it was a reflection of his own moral decay. The physical confrontation with rival gangsters was a stark reminder of the emotional turmoil brewing within him. Al returned home that night, haunted by the faces of those he had harmed. He could almost hear Clara's voice echoing in his mind, urging him to confront the truth of who he was. He poured himself a drink, the whiskey burning his throat, but it did little to numb the guilt gnawing at his conscience. Days later, as he sat in his dimly lit office, the weight of betrayal loomed large. One of his closest associates had been leaking information to the rival gangs, undermining everything Al had built. The betrayal cut deep, leaving him feeling isolated and vulnerable. He had put his faith in loyalty, yet here he was, facing the consequences of misplaced trust. In that moment of despair, he thought of his sister. If she were to be found out, the danger would not only come from his enemies, but from within his own ranks. The emotional roller coaster intensified as Al found himself at a crossroads. Fight to maintain the power he had clawed for, or risk everything to seek redemption and protect the family he never knew he had. Clara's unwavering belief in the possibility of change began to resonate within him, igniting a flicker of hope. But the stakes were high, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. As Al navigated this treacherous terrain, the challenges mounted. He had to confront not only the specter of betrayal and violence, but also the haunting fear that he might be too far gone to change. His past loomed large, and with every decision, he risked losing everything, or finally finding a way to embrace the man he truly wished to become. The journey toward self-discovery was just beginning, and with it came the promise of transformation, but also the threat of losing the very connections he yearned to forge. In a world that demanded survival at any cost, Al Capone was forced to redefine what it meant to be a man. As Al Capone's world grew increasingly chaotic, new challenges emerged like dark clouds gathering on the horizon. One fateful evening, while attending a clandestine meeting with his remaining loyalists, a surprise ambush shattered the fragile sense of security he had clung to. It was not just the rival gang he had expected. It was a coalition of former allies, those he had once considered friends, banding together to usurp his power. The betrayal stung deeper than any physical blow, leaving Al grappling with a newfound vulnerability that threatened to unravel the threads of his empire. The attack left him shaken, both physically and emotionally. He narrowly escaped with a bruised body and a battered spirit, but the incident haunted him. In the darkness of his thoughts, he felt the suffocating weight of isolation. Loyalty was the currency he had traded in for years, and now, with whispers of his vulnerability circulating through the underbelly of Chicago, he questioned everything he had built. Clara's words echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of the man he could become if he dared to step away from the shadows of his past. Yet, the emotional toll was not just a solitary battle. Clara, who had begun to see the flickers of change in Al, now found herself torn between her commitment to social justice and the growing realization that Al was not yet ready to sever his ties with the life he had built. Their friendship was tested as Clara took on a more active role in the community, rallying support for the victims of crime, victims who were often caught in the crossfire of Al's operations. Each time she confronted the harsh realities of the world he inhabited, Al felt the chasm between them widen, deepening the conflict within his heart. Amidst this turmoil, Al faced yet another challenge. His sister, the very embodiment of the hope he yearned for, had come to Chicago. The news of her arrival sent shockwaves through him, stirring an instinctual protectiveness that clashed with the turbulent reality of his life. He could not afford to let her fall into the same dangerous web that had ensnared him. The thought of her being hurt because of his past choices ignited a fierce urgency within him. But how could he protect her when he was struggling to protect himself? The complexities of his relationship with Clara intensified. Their conversations became strained as they navigated the duality of their worlds. Clara challenged him, urging him to step away from the violent life he led. But Al was caught in a tempest of loyalty to his gang and a burgeoning desire to redefine himself. "I'm not asking you to abandon who you are," Clara implored one evening, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I'm asking you to fight for something greater than yourself." Her unwavering belief in the possibility of change stoked a fire within him, yet Al remained ensnared in the fear that true change would demand sacrifices he was not ready to make. Then, as if the universe conspired against him, Al received news that rival gangs were organizing a full-scale attack, emboldened by rumors of his weakened state. The threat was not just to him, but also to Clara and his sister, both of whom could become collateral damage in a war he never wished to ignite. His heart raced as he imagined the worst: Clara caught in the crossfire, his sister targeted as a means to bring him down. The thought was unbearable, a sobering wake-up call that urged him to confront his demons. In the days that followed, Al's internal conflict deepened. He began to question his own values and the very foundation of his existence. The streets that had once felt like home now echoed with the cries of those he had wronged, and with every decision, he faced the looming specter of regret. The pressure mounted as he juggled his responsibilities to his gang with the desire to break free from a life of violence. He felt the toll on his body and mind, a constant state of vigilance, sleepless nights haunted by nightmares, and the gnawing anxiety of impending doom. But amidst this chaos, Clara emerged as more than a friend. She became a beacon of hope, challenging him to look beyond the immediate dangers. She gathered the community around her, channeling their collective strength to push back against the tide of violence that threatened to engulf them all. Watching her lead with such conviction stirred something deep within Al, a flicker of the man he longed to be, the man who could stand against the very forces he once embodied. With the stakes higher than ever, Al realized that he stood at a precipice. The turning point was imminent. a moment where he would have to decide whether to embrace the darkness of his past or step into the light of a new beginning. He understood that true power lay not in fear and violence, but in the courage to confront one's own shortcomings. As Clara rallied the community, Al felt the weight of the world shift. His journey toward redemption was fraught with peril, but the time had come to confront the ghosts of his past and reclaim the man he wished to become, or risk losing everything he held dear, including the possibility of love and family. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets of Chicago, the air crackled with tension. Al Capone stood at the edge of a dilapidated warehouse, the site of his last meeting. He had gathered a few remaining loyalists, but the familiar faces now bore the weight of doubt and fear. The ambush still lingered in their minds, a stark reminder that loyalty was as fragile as glass. Just as Al opened his mouth to speak, a deafening explosion shattered the evening calm, sending him sprawling to the ground. In that moment, the reality of his world shifted dramatically. The sound of gunfire erupted around him, chaos erupting as rival gang members stormed the warehouse, their faces twisted in rage and vengeance. Al's heart raced, not just from the fear of losing his life, but from the suffocating realization that he had lost control of everything he had built. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, adrenaline propelling him away from the chaos, but a new profound fear gripped his heart. What if Clara and his sister were caught in this storm? As he stumbled through the smoke-filled air, Al felt an overwhelming sense of despair wash over him. This was not just an attack, it was a reckoning. The world he had constructed around himself, built on power and fear, was crumbling, and with it, the man he had always been. Each gunshot echoed like a ticking clock, pushing him to confront the choices that had led him to this moment. He was not just a kingpin. He was a man who had lost sight of his own humanity. Emerging from the warehouse, Al found himself in the street, the cacophony of violence fading into a distant roar. Breathing heavily, he leaned against a lamppost, the cold metal grounding him in the reality of his situation. Clara's face flashed in his mind, her passion, her determination, the way she believed in a world that could be better. In that moment, Al was struck by an epiphany. He had the power to redefine his path, to make choices that would either spiral him further into darkness or lead him toward redemption. The realization hit hard like a punch to the gut. He was not just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the lives of those he had wronged, those who had become collateral damage in his quest for power. The weight of his decisions pressed down on him, igniting a fierce urgency within. If he continued down this path, not only would he lose Clara and his sister, but he would lose the chance to be the man he wanted to be. Al's body trembled as he stood there, grappling with the realization that he could no longer afford to live in fear. He had to confront the rival gangs, not with violence, but with a new strategy, one that would require courage and perhaps a willingness to walk away from the life he had led. The thought of going against everything he had built felt like a betrayal to his loyalists. But what was loyalty worth if it meant sacrificing the ones he cared about? As he turned to make his way home, Al felt a renewed sense of purpose, ignited by the chaos that had threatened to engulf him. The streets of Chicago that had once felt like a battleground were now a canvas for potential change. He envisioned a different life, one where he could stand alongside Clara, fighting for justice rather than perpetuating the cycle of violence that had defined his existence. But as he walked away from the remnants of the attack, a chilling realization settled in. This path would not be easy. The rival gangs would not back down without a fight, and the coalition of former allies would see his attempts at change as a threat. The stakes had never been higher, and with Clara and his sister at risk, Al understood that the time for action was now. He was at a turning point, one that would either lead him to redemption or plunge him deeper into darkness. It was time to reclaim the man he wished to become, not just for himself, but for the lives he had touched, and for the lives he still had the chance to save. As Al Capone made his way through the darkened streets, the echoes of gunfire still ringing in his ears, he felt a palpable shift within him. He had resolved to confront the rival gang leaders, but the looming threat of betrayal hung heavy in the air. With Clara and his sister in jeopardy, he knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. He could no longer operate from a place of fear. He had to embrace the very humanity he had neglected for so long. The meeting point was set, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place that had once been a hub of industry but now stood as a shell, much like Al's own life. With each step toward the factory, his heart pounded, a reminder that the choices he made tonight would define not only his future, but the lives of those he loved. The tension was thick as he approached, shadows dancing in the flickering light of a lone street lamp. Inside, the air was charged with animosity. The rival gang members, led by a man named Vincent, awaited him, their expressions a mix of disdain and anticipation. Al felt the weight of their gazes, assessing him, sizing him up like a beast ready for slaughter. But this time, he was not the predator. He was a man ready to embrace vulnerability. "Capone," Vincent sneered, stepping forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "What brings you here? You've lost your edge." Al took a steadying breath, the lessons of compassion and redemption coursing through him. "I'm not here to fight," he declared, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. "I'm here to end this cycle of violence. We're destroying our own lives, our own families." Laughter erupted from the gang members, the mockery ringing hollow in the cavernous space. "And what makes you think we'll listen to you? You've built your empire on blood and fear," Vincent challenged, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. Al felt a flicker of doubt, but then Clara's face filled his mind, her belief in a better future giving him strength. "Because I have seen the pain we cause. I've lost too much already. My sister, Clara, they deserve better than this. This war doesn't just affect us, it destroys our communities. We don't have to live like this." The tension escalated, a palpable energy crackling in the air. Vincent's expression hardened, and Al braced himself for the inevitable confrontation. But instead of reaching for his weapon, he took a step forward, defying the expectations of violence that had been bred in this world. "Let's make a deal. We can carve out territories, create a system that benefits us all, without bloodshed. We can be stronger together." For a moment, silence enveloped the room, the weight of Al's words hanging in the air. It was a gamble, one that could either save lives or seal his fate. Vincent's eyes flickered with uncertainty, the tension in his posture shifting. He stepped back, glancing at his gang as if searching for confirmation. "Why would we trust you?" Vincent finally asked, his voice low. "Because I'm willing to change," Al replied, his heart racing. "I've seen what this life does to us. I know I can't erase my past, but I can choose how I move forward. We all can." A murmur rippled through the group, and Al could feel the tide shifting. He reached deep within himself, channeling every ounce of conviction he had. "We can create something better, a legacy that doesn't rely on fear. Think of the families we could support, the lives we could save. This is our chance to redefine power." Vincent hesitated, and Al seized the moment. "Join me. Let's build something that lasts, something we can be proud of." The silence was deafening, and Al held his breath, waiting for the verdict that could change everything. Then, unexpectedly, Vincent nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that caused the tension to crack. "All right, Capone, let's talk." As they began to outline a new way forward, a sense of liberation washed over Al. This was not just a negotiation, it was a moment of transformation. The factory, once a place of decay, now felt like a foundation for hope. The bonds of loyalty among his gang members began to shift, and for the first time, Al felt the weight of his past lifting. In that moment, he understood that the greatest challenge he faced was not the rival gangs but the shadows of his own choices. He had stepped into the light, choosing a path of redemption over destruction, and in doing so, he had ignited the possibility of change. The emotional weight of that realization filled him with a mix of joy and relief, not only for himself but for all those who would benefit from this newfound alliance. As the meeting continued, Al felt a surge of hope, the hope that perhaps he could be the man Clara believed he could be, and that together they could forge a brighter future. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them, not as a kingpin, but as a man committed to making things right. In the weeks that followed the tense meeting in the abandoned factory, the atmosphere in Chicago began to shift, mirroring the transformation that was taking place within Al Capone. The tentative alliance he had forged with Vincent and the rival gang was not without its challenges, but the commitment to a new way forward began to bear fruit. Rumors of the agreement spread, and for the first time in years, the streets felt less dangerous. Business owners, long terrorized by threats and violence, cautiously began to reopen their doors, hopeful that the tide of fear might be receding. Al found himself in the unfamiliar role of mediator, guiding discussions between the factions that had once been sworn enemies. His days were filled with meetings and negotiations, all aimed at creating a level of order that had long been absent. He felt an exhilarating sense of purpose, but also an undercurrent of anxiety. Would the fragile peace hold? Would his past catch up with him? Clara and his sister, who had once lived in constant trepidation, began to breathe easier. With Al's newfound focus on stability, he made a concerted effort to spend more time with them. Clara's smile returned, and she often remarked how much lighter their home felt. It was a reminder of what Al had fought for, not just a cessation of violence, but a chance for his loved ones to thrive. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Clara looked at him with a mix of admiration and concern. "You've changed, Al, but don't forget who you are. Just be careful." Her words struck a chord, prompting Al to reflect on the journey that had brought him to this point. In the solitude of the night, he often pondered the weight of his past, the bloodshed, the fear, the choices that had led him to a life of crime. The man he had been was still a part of him, but the man he was becoming felt like a revelation. He was learning that vulnerability could be a strength, that the essence of leadership lay not in intimidation, but in understanding and compassion. As he processed these revelations, Al felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. The path had not been easy, and he knew there would still be obstacles ahead. Yet, he had gained not only a sense of purpose, but also a deeper understanding of the strength in unity. The alliance he had formed was more than a business arrangement. It was a community striving for something better. The secondary characters, Vincent and his gang, began to see tangible changes in their lives as well. With Al's guidance, they started investing in local businesses, creating jobs, and addressing the needs of their neighborhoods. Vincent, once a hardened rival, became an ally, and the two men grew to respect one another in ways Al had never thought possible. Their shared vision of a new future made it easier to navigate the complexities of their pasts. As the months rolled on, the streets of Chicago transformed. Crime rates fell, and a sense of community emerged where distrust had once reigned. Al's efforts began to inspire others, leading to a ripple effect that spread throughout the city. He witnessed firsthand how collaboration could breed hope, how the act of reaching out could break down barriers that had existed for decades. Amid all this change, Al reflected on the sacrifices made along the way. Friends lost to violence, relationships strained by his choices, and the burden of his past no longer felt like chains but rather lessons that shaped who he was becoming. He realized that true power did not lie in fear, but in the ability to uplift others, to foster an environment where everyone had a chance to succeed. One night, standing on the rooftop of a newly renovated building that once served as a hub for illicit activity, Al looked out over the city he had once terrorized. The skyline, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, felt alive with promise. He had embraced a new identity, not as a kingpin but as a community leader, a brother and a protector. Feeling a deep sense of closure, Al understood that he was far from perfect, but that was okay. He had chosen to rewrite his story, to embrace the humanity he had long neglected. In doing so, he had not only changed his own life, but had ignited a movement that fostered hope in others. As he turned away from the view, Al felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There would always be challenges ahead, but he was no longer alone. He had forged bonds built on trust and mutual respect, and together they could continue to build a brighter future. In that moment, amid the echoes of his past, Al Capone felt a profound sense of peace, a true transformation, leading him toward a life filled with purpose and possibility. The story that had once been defined by violence and betrayal was now a testament to change, resilience, and the power of redemption. It was a new beginning, and Al was ready to embrace it wholeheartedly, not just for himself but for all those he cared about. As Al Capone stepped back into the world, he carried with him the hope of a better tomorrow, a testament to the belief that even the darkest paths could lead to the light.